All right, let's go to the Minnesota Vikings coming off a 14-win season. They've got some of the more fascinating decisions here because, look, let's be honest. Last year at this time, they weren't getting any of the hype in the NFC North. You had the Lions as Super Bowl contenders. You had the Packers, who looked like the best young team in the NFL, who made it to the final 8 in 2023. You had the Bears with the number 1 overall pick, all this cap space, drafting Caleb Williams. They were getting hyped up. And the Vikings were the afterthought, right? We're going to bring in Sam Darnold as a bridge. We're going to draft whatever quarterbacks left. And they go up and they get J.J. McCarthy. They made some really nice moves in free agency, finally having money to spend after getting rid of the Kirk Cousins contract. Jonathan Grenard came in and had a huge year. And Andrew Van Ginkel, they did a really nice job bringing in talent. But they felt like the fourth most important team in the division a year ago. And here they are playing for the division title in the number 1 seed in week 18.
Such a fascinating, 18 months worth of decision making for them. I mean, they finally put a stop to the Kirk Cousins thing. He gets the Achilles injury. They draw a line in the sand financially, and they say, "Look, if you're willing to play under this number, we can do this again. If you want more than this, we're going to have to say bye bye and go in a different direction." Cousins goes off to Atlanta. That's its own saga. So then the Vikings are without a quarterback, and low enough in the draft again, like one of these teams that you're like, they might not have a great shot at one of these guys without doing something aggressive. They were paired a lot with J.J. McCarthy pre-draft, but a lot of that was contingent on trading up to go get him at, 4 or whatever. J.J. McCarthy does end up sliding. The Vikings sort of have the discipline to wait that out, don't have to give up a ton to get him. J.J. McCarthy is now the quarterback, right? And he goes through preseason, kind of shows flashes, encouraging. We expect him to start sooner rather than later. And then he comes out of that preseason game and goes from oh, that was encouraging. And then the next day I was like, actually, his knee's kind of sore. Well, that's a bit of a bummer. And then he goes for a scan. It's like, yeah, that sore knee, he's actually done for the year now. Bye-bye. And at that point, you're like, well, the Viking season just went up in smoke. Like that, everything just gone. This is now a waste of everybody's time for the next, 6 months. We're just treading water until we can get J.J. McCarthy back next year. And then Sam Darnold goes on this ridiculous run where he looks like a totally different human being, plays like a top 5 type of quarterback most of the way through the season. And as you said, week 18, the Vikings are going into the final week of the regular season with a game against Detroit that would give them the number 1 seed, home field advantage, and a sort of declaration that they are the best team in the NFC, and the Super Bowl may be going through, they would be the team to really threaten a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold. Only Darnold implodes in that game. Everything unspools. The playoff game's even worse. The Rams wrecked them after facing the Lions for the second time that season, and the whole thing flies apart at the seams. And in 2 weeks, we went from, well, this team has to bring back Darnold now. Like, there's no way you could walk away from him given what he's done this season, to he completely unravels. And you're like, question number 1 is, what do you do with that if you're the Vikings? Like, do you go, that was so concerning, we stick with the original plan, which is, thanks for your service, Sam, but it's JJ's team now?
Yeah, and then let's add to the mix here when we talk about just the fascinating decisions the Vikings have. They have a ton of cap space and a rookie contract quarterback. So not only cap space now, but flexibility over the next few years. And then they only have 3 draft picks, a 1 and 2 5s.
4, I think.
Is it 4?
Yeah.
I thought it was 3.
Well, assuming you can trust any of that information out there on the web, which is sketchy at best.
There we go. They have a handful of draft picks. How about that?
Tankathon has it with 4, which is their 3 and 1 from Cleveland.
Okay, I got it. But not high value draft picks, basically. The
Correct.
Lowest draft capital in the NFL, regardless. So yeah, it's an interesting situation for Minnesota. So it all starts with that Sam Darnold decision. And as you said, when we were talking to our friend Matt Caller, who I know is listens to all of our shows. We were talking to Matt in week 17, like heading into the Lions game. And we were saying, you probably have to consider Darnold. And to me, that decision, it's like similar to the Brock Purdy decision with the 49ers, where it's this, I've got this known commodity now, somewhat known commodity, right? I know that Brock Purdy plus Kyle Shanahan can equal high-end success offensively. And we may have learned that Sam Darnold plus Kevin O'Connell, this group of playmakers, equals success. And if you just take a step back and you say, well, the goal is to just make sure you find a quarterback that you can win with, and it doesn't matter if you just drafted a guy, like you just had an MVP caliber season from Sam Darnold. Like, if you just give him $40 million a year and it's a known commodity, go do it. But week 18 in the playoff really may have undone that enough that the more likely scenario is, we're going to tag and trade him, and we're going to go with the kid, and we're going to take that cap flexibility going forward.
It's such an amazing kind of outcome, because I think I did Collar's show. I don't think it was before the week 18 game, but I think it might have been the week before that. So before week 17. And, one of the topics was, well, can you walk away effectively from Sam Darnold given the season that he's had? And, we had this whole discussion, and I don't think I ever considered a scenario where what happened, right? Where what if he unravels so completely in the final two games, the most important games of their season, that it effectively undermines everything you saw from the first 16 weeks of the year. Like, I don't think that ever crossed our minds that was an actual possibility, that even a relatively, average or below average performance in the postseason, you're like, well, we can still, overall, this has all been really good. But the end two games were so bad that it's like, and not just so bad, but like the Rams game in particular, where every sack he took was like, what are you doing? Like, this is New York Jets. Yeah, I'm seeing ghosts on the sideline, Sam Darnold again. You're like, I didn't think that guy still existed. Like, I thought this had been something that was fixed, but it was genuinely like someone had hacked the operating system and just hit delete, and you went all the way back to like rookie Sam Darnold OS 1.0 in the NFL. And I genuinely hadn't even considered that as like as a possible outcome within his range of things that could happen in the last couple of weeks. And yet I genuinely think that's gone from Minnesota would have found a way to keep him, to bring him back at whatever that contract would have looked like, to now I think they're going to let him go and say, as great as the year's been, we'll always have 2024. But thanks. We're going to turn it over to JJ.
Here's the one other thing to consider that I've mentioned here before. I always talk about teams and their schematic advantage, and you lean into, what do you have from an infrastructure standpoint? What do you have schematically? What do you have from a coaching standpoint that perhaps elevates players? And if you have that, for instance, say the Baltimore Ravens, can they deal with a lesser offensive line because they have Lamar Jackson and he cancels out a defender in the run game? Can they do that? Yeah, that's an advantage that the Ravens have. They don't need to have a top 5 O-line every year because of Lamar. Do the Vikings have that advantage now with Kevin O'Connell? We have mounting evidence now where a career 500 Kirk Cousins won a ridiculous number of games for the Minnesota Vikings. Like, he goes from a 500 quarterback to like a 700 quarterback with Minnesota. We have Sam Darnold, who goes from a 350 winning percentage quarterback to 14-3 or 14-4, whatever it was, right? So you have this mounting evidence, perhaps, that O'Connell and his system, and perhaps having Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison helps, that they're able to get the most out of quarterbacks. Now we have 2, and so you can lean into that and say, well, he'll get the most out of JJ McCarthy, and that comes with this added cap flexibility. We now have this 3-year window to build around him with incredible cap flexibility, and in what they haven't had in Minnesota for a while since they signed Kirk Cousins back in 2018. So I think that is the realistic move, and they can do their best to, franchise tag Sam Darnold and try to trade him, let him walk. You get the 3rd round comp pick, whatever it might be, depending on what moves you make. So that's where they're at. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be JJ McCarthy's team a year from now.
I think it is as well. Number one, the way they've been talking about it, it's sort of been it's been in the theme has been like, thanks for this season. Darnold's done great things. Bye-bye. So I suspect that's kind of where it goes. And also, they moved around a payment to Byron Murphy to basically give them time to work on a long-term deal. They effectively traded, we will remove the ability to franchise tag you in exchange for you moving this deadline back a bit to give us a little bit more breathing space to try and make a deal happen, right? So Byron Murphy either stays in Minnesota on a long-term deal, or he goes to free agency. But the point is, that's a move that like signals we're trying to make this work. They could have done the same thing with Darnold. He has a similar bonus, and they didn't. So the fact that they haven't tried to make that happen suggests to me again that they're not trying that hard to keep him around. And, I guess they still, that frees them up the franchise tag to potentially use on him. But I get the impression that this is going the way of, it was one amazing season for Darnold, but we're going to let him go get paid somewhere else. And we're going to turn the keys over to JJ McCarthy, who was supposed to have them this time a year ago.
And then, so when we look at the rest of the roster, assuming it's JJ McCarthy going forward, the bitter taste in your mouth coming out of those games was not only Darnold, but the pass protection wasn't great. We know Christian Darrisaw was injured, and they did a nice job picking up Cam Robinson. Timing worked out really well to pick up Cam Robinson at the deadline. He's a Vikings free agent technically. I mean, he's not coming back. It'll be Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill at tackle. They're still solid there, but a hole at right guard. And with their money, are they in the Trey Smith sweepstakes here at right guard, trying to shore up that interior?
And because they don't have draft picks at the moment, they need to spend. Like the free agency is their pathway to making things happen. That game, those two games, late in the year, felt like the sort of watershed moment. Like the interior of the Vikings offensive line has been a weakness for years, right? And Kevin O'Connell's offense definitely helped it, and it made it, it patched it over a little bit. But like the idea that, like if you went back to the first couple of years of Garrett Bradbury's career and told somebody that he would still be the Minnesota Vikings center in 2024 and 2025, they think you're insane. But somehow the guys persisted because they've just been like, well, let's not bother to upgrade this too hard. Same with the guards. Like they've been persisting with these players for some time now, and not really upgrading. This feels like the kind of watershed game, like the Chiefs Bucks Super Bowl, where you're like, okay, we need to change something fundamental with this and go in a completely different direction. I do think that they're going to try and upgrade that interior pretty hard this offseason. Maybe they're in the Trey Smith sweepstakes. There's a lot of teams out there with money to spend that also need guards, so maybe that money goes too high. But I do think that guard and maybe center is definitely an area where they are going to look to spend this offseason.
I think Tevin Jenkins, the former Bear, might actually be better value, for the money than a Trey Smith.
But a much bigger injury risk.
Yeah, you got the injury risk there. Mekhi Becton, 1 year at right guard for the Eagles. I think all of those guys are potential
also
options.
Injury risk.
Yes, always for Becton. But the Bradbury thing is fascinating. His career PFF grades, the consistency is incredible, Sam. 57, 61, 60, 67, 60, 62. That's 6 years into his career. Everything's pretty much between 57 and 62 in his pass blocking grades. Always the weaker part of his game. So I could see this, especially with JJ McCarthy, his first year as a starter, year 2 in the NFL. I could see Minnesota trying to upgrade there. So I don't know if they're in the free agent center market, if they're going to look at Drew Dahlman potentially, but I could see a lot of moves being made there at both guard spots and at center to complement their one of the better pairs of tackles in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, we've flagged Drew Dahlman before as a guy that's available. I wonder if Ryan Kelly, again, another injury risk, but would be a buy low candidate. Ryan Kelly at least has got some fairly extensive tape of being one of the best centers in the NFL when he is healthy and a little bit earlier in his career. Maybe that's a risk they want to take. Maybe they can convince Kevin Zeitler to play in Minnesota for a year. Like, I don't, it's tough because I think actually it's a solid enough group of tackles available in free agency. I don't know that it's a particularly good group of guards, and there's a lot of teams that need interior help more than tackle help. James Daniels, another guy with good tape, but coming off an injury. Like there's a ton of these guys who are coming off major concerning injuries or just have major concerning injury history. Again, sometimes these are the positions you put yourself in, but like there's not a ton of guys that you look at this and saying, okay, good news, Vikings. There's players available and money to spend. Maybe Brandon Scherf, somebody that's always underachieved relative to his draft status, but is solid as a right guard, is a good enough upgrade for them that they'd go in that direction.
The other place to take a look at is cornerback, and it was a crazy offseason for the Vikings last year at corner. Obviously, the unfortunate death of Kyrie Jackson as a draft pick. You had Mekhi Blackman get injured pretty early after a really nice rookie season in 2023. They were stitching it together last year with Shaquille Griffin and Stephon Gilmore. So if they do bring Byron Murphy back, as you've already talked about, we're still talking about 2 starting corners likely needed. I mean, well, Blackman probably steps back into one of those spots, but either way, cornerback depth and just replenishing at that position, that's another one of those teams picking at the back end of the first round that matches up with some of the cornerback depth, I think, in the late first round of this draft.
Yeah, I mean, that makes the most sense, I think, in terms of a place to spend a first round draft pick. Like, both starters last year effectively were late, veteran pickups to try and come in and like completely repair. I mean, their season was a lot of that. Like, cornerback, they had to basically repair a starting duo close to the start of the season. Cam Robinson comes in to repair the left tackle spot that went down before the trade deadline. Like, they just patched up this team, and unfortunately, that's what it does to your draft picks when you make like good move. Like, Cam Robinson theoretically rescued Minnesota's season last season. They could have gone from Darisaw, one of the best left tackles in the NFL, to like a non-viable starter, and suddenly the whole offense falls apart. Instead, you get Cam Robinson, who was good enough that let you contend for the number 1 overall seed and, keep you in it. Only now it's like, well, you didn't win a championship. You didn't progress in the playoffs. You kind of spiraled off and blew up at the end. And now you don't have the draft pick that you had to trade away for Cam Robinson to come in and fix it. Like, it was a very short-term move that did work, kind of. But now you're living with that. So, yeah, corner at the back end of the first makes a ton of sense. Byron Murphy, even if you bring him back, is more of a slot guy anyway.
Yep.
On paper, Mekhi Blackman should be one of your 2 starting corners, but he's a young corner coming off an ACL injury. That's not a great spot to be in. So, you could realistically be in the market for 2 starting corners still.
I could see in free agency, Travarius Ward could be a fit, right? Because Minnesota has the money. He's going to be probably one of the highest paid corners on the market. The other potential connection, Brian Flores connection, Jonathan Jones, New England Patriots, free agent cornerback that I think could be a decent fit there in Minnesota. But I think either way, they've got money to spend once again. I think we're talking O-line, we're talking secondary, probably some defensive line depth with the money. And then, can they take those 4 draft picks and flip those into 6 or 7? Fascinating to me that Kwesi, the analytically sound GM, is the one that was, trading up and trading out future picks and everything. You would have assumed that he's the guy that would have been, sitting there with 12 to 15 picks every single year. But he's been aggressive, and they made some moves last year to get Dallas Turner, had to make some moves to get Cam Robinson in the building immediately. And so here they are with 4 draft picks heading into this.
But that's the other thing is, they're picking 24. That's probably going to be a pretty solid spot for a first round corner. But I think almost what needs to happen is this team needs to get out of 24 and be picking, 34, be picking 10 spots lower down to amass another couple of draft picks. And all right, you still might have some, solid players there. But I do think this team in an ideal world wants to be picking 10 spots lower in the draft than they currently are on paper, with a trade that gives them some more draft picks.
All right, have we fixed the Vikings? JJ McCarthy's team, we've fixed the offensive line with a whole bunch of options. We're going to draft a corner, free agent corner. The only thing we didn't talk about is the D-line depth, but they'll figure that out as well. Second wave of free agency there.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.